She thought it was just grief, a little golden retriever barking at his master's coffin, refusing to move, refusing to let go. But what if that barking wasn't sorrow, but a warning? In a small town where loyalty runs deeper than truth, one brave little dog is about to uncover a secret buried with the dead. Stay with us, this story is only just beginning, and you won't believe where it leads. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. Redwood Falls, Oregon in the early days of October, is a portrait painted in muted tones, gray mist rolling from the riverbank's oak trees arching over narrow roads with leaves just beginning their fiery descent. On this particular morning, the sky was an unbroken quilt of pewter clouds threatening rain, but holding back as if the weather itself was uncertain how to behave on the day of a funeral. The town was quiet, almost reverent, as if every soul had pressed pause for the passing of Walter Bennett, the police chief whose presence had been as much a part of Redwood Falls as the red brick library or the old water tower. People gathered in silent clusters outside the small stone church at the edge of town, their voices low and their steps cautious on the damp grass. Kayla Morgan stood beneath a sprawling maple, watching as mourners trickled in. At 34, Kayla had the look of someone built by struggle athletic, but lean, a faint scar across her left eyebrow, remnant of a car crash in her rookie year, and brown hair kept ruthlessly neat beneath her navy blue cap. Her eyes, a sharp shade of hazel, seemed to see through the day's haze and into the restless undercurrents of every gathering. She had been the first woman to rise to detective in Redwood Falls, thanks in no small part to Bennett's relentless faith in her, and she wore her dark dress uniform today, with attention that came from more than just grief. Standing beside her, clutching a leash that trembled in her grip, was Ellie Bennett Walter's granddaughter. At just 10 years old, Ellie was a wisp of a girl, freckles across her cheeks, sandy blonde hair that curled wildly, and blue eyes that had spent more time reading books than playing games. She was dressed in a simple navy blue dress, her white cardigan pulled tightly around her small frame eyes, red from a night of tears. Ellie's quietness was not new. She'd always been a thoughtful, sometimes lonely child, shaped by the early loss of her mother and the gentle, patient love of her grandfather. The object of her struggle was Sunny, a petite golden retriever of 3 years, whose golden fur was now flecked with burrs and stray twigs from a restless morning. Sunny was not a large dog. In fact, he was noticeably smaller than most of his breed, his ears still round and his eyes wide with a kind of permanent puppyish concern. Sunny had lived with the Bennetts since he was a few weeks old, rescued by Walter himself after a disastrous flood in the next county over. Despite his size, Sunny had proven himself sharp and unusually empathetic, able to sense moods and even storms before they arrived. To Ellie and Walter, Sunny was not just a pet, but a member of their small, patched-together family. As the church doors swung open, the organ's somber notes spilled into the air, and the townsfolk began to file in. The interior of St. Agnes Church was awash in pale light, the stained glass windows turning the day's grayness into gentle hues of blue and gold. At the front of the nave, the mahogany casket adorned with a spray of white lilies rested beneath the simple wooden cross. On either side, the officers of Redwood Falls PD stood in crisp lines, badges glinting, expressions sober. At the far side, Mayor Don Reeves mingled with the more prominent guests. Reeves, in his late 50s, was a portly man with a ruddy complexion, meticulously combed silver hair, and an expression that hovered between solemnity and impatience. He was known for his affable campaign persona, though those who worked with him described a man who valued order above compassion. His sharp, evaluating gaze was ever present, flickering over the mourners as if appraising the turnout. Today he wore a black suit, the jacket stretched slightly at the shoulders, and when he reached for Kayla's hand, his grip was perfunctory, his words brief. "Detective Morgan, I hope you'll keep things moving," he said under his breath. "The family wants to get through this quickly." Kayla nodded, not trusting herself to speak. At the pew closest to the casket, Sarah Bennett Walter's daughter-in-law and Ellie's aunt sat with her hands clasped in her lap. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with dark straight hair that fell past her shoulders and a bearing that radiated quiet strength. Her face, though marked by grief, remained composed. She was known throughout town as a devoted nurse at the local clinic, her calm in crisis forged years ago when she lost her husband to a hit and run. The tragedy had deepened. Her empathy made her someone people turned to in moments of despair, but it had also left a brittleness, a tendency to lock her pain behind a wall of professionalism. As the service began, Kayla kept a watchful eye on Sonny, who sat beside Ellie at the aisle's end, his tail tucked and his ears perked forward. For the first half of the ceremony, he was quiet, watchful, but obedient. But as Father Callahan, the parish priest, a rotund, bespectacled man in his 60s, whose gentle sermons were famous for their practical wisdom, intoned a prayer for the departed, something shifted. Sonny's ears shot up. A tremor ran through his small body. And then, as the pallbearers moved to close the casket, Sonny began to whine soft at first, but rising quickly in the pitch and urgency. Ellie tried to soothe him, but Sonny yanked the leash from her grip and bounded down the center aisle. The congregation gasped. Sarah half rose from her seat, but Kayla was already moving. She caught up with Sonny just as he leapt onto the steps before the casket barking frantically. The sound echoed through the church, loud, sharp. Not the confused barking of a distressed animal, but insistent, almost purposeful. Pallbearer Mike Fisher, a broad-shouldered officer with an easygoing smile, and the habit of telling terrible jokes at department parties, reached down to restrain the dog. "It's just grief," he murmured to the congregation, though his eyes flicked to Kayla, uncertain. Mike was a good cop, but his tendency to avoid conflict made him easy to overlook in a crisis. Sonny, however, would not be calmed. He circled the casket, barking and pawing at the polished wood, his small body trembling. Several officers stepped forward, but Kayla held up a hand. "Wait," she said, her voice quiet but commanding. "Let's give him a moment." The mayor shifted in his seat, looking annoyed. "This is highly irregular," he hissed. Sarah joined Kayla at the front, her hands shaking as she tried to call Sonny away. "He's never done this before," she whispered. "Not even when Walter went to the hospital. He's always so gentle he won't even chase the neighbor's cat." Kayla crouched beside the casket watching Sonny. The dog's eyes were wide, focused not on the grieving faces, but on the casket itself. Kayla felt a prickle of unease. She reached out palm up, and Sonny pressed his cold nose into her hand, but didn't calm down. Instead, he began to scratch at a seam along the side of the casket, whining, then barking again, a sharp staccato sound that seemed to carry a warning. "Maybe we should—" Mike Fisher started, but the mayor cut him off. "That's enough," Reeves said. "Remove the animal. This is a place of dignity." Sonny was finally picked up and carried still wriggling and barking into the church vestibule. The service resumed, but the tension remained. Ellie, bereft, clung to Kayla, whose mind raced. She had been at dozens of funerals she'd comforted officers' families, handled scenes of loss. But she had never seen a dog react this way, not even Sonny, whose loyalty was legendary among those who knew Walter Bennett. After the service, as mourners filed out under the heavy sky, Kayla lingered outside the church with Ellie and Sarah. Sonny, finally quiet, pressed close to Ellie, his tail low, but his eyes never leaving the building. Sarah tried to offer Kayla a sad, grateful smile, but her voice was tight. "Thank you for understanding. He's the last piece of family we have." Kayla squeezed her shoulder, then crouched to stroke Sonny's head. "I believe he's trying to tell us something," she said softly so only Ellie could hear. The sky finally opened, a cold drizzle falling as the hearse rolled away. Beneath the hush of rain, as umbrellas blossomed across the cemetery, Kayla watched Sonny's eyes still fixed on the casket as if willing it to open. There was more to this story than grief, and Kayla's instincts, honed by years of chasing half-truths, were already whispering, "Look closer." Kayla Morgan stood at her bedroom window late that evening, watching the rain ripple down the glass. The house was silent, save for the occasional patter of Sonny's paws across the hardwood floor and the muffled sighs of wind outside. On the street below, Redwood Falls was half hidden by the persistent drizzle. Porch lights shimmered in shallow puddles. The funeral had ended hours ago, but the tension lingered like a fog. She could not shake the image of Sonny's frantic barking, nor the unease tightening her chest. Sonny curled at her feet, lifted his head, and gazed at her, his golden fur dulled by the gloom, eyes deep pools of concern. Kayla reached down her hand, warm against the dog's soft head. "You miss him too, huh?" she whispered. The truth was, she missed Walter Bennett more than she could say. The old chief had been more than a boss. He had been her rescuer, her sternest critic, her friend. Her mind slipped backward to the day she met him, 17 and angry, standing in a police holding cell. She remembered the way Walter had entered, not with the swagger of authority, but with a quiet steadiness. He'd been in his late 40s, then tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered skin and deep lines carved by laughter and sorrow. His gray-blue eyes, sharp and kind, had assessed her not as a criminal, but as someone lost and worth saving. "Why do you keep running?" he'd asked not unkindly. She had glared, daring him to look away, but he never did. That day Walter Bennett had offered her a deal community service, weekly check-ins, and the promise that if she worked hard, she could rewrite her story. She did. Over time, she rose through the ranks first, as a patrol officer, then detective, guided always by his trust and the gravelly wisdom of his voice. When something feels wrong, Kayla trusts it. Those words rang in her mind now. Walter had never trusted easily, but once you earned it, he was fiercely loyal. He'd taught her how to read a suspect's body language, how to listen not just with ears, but with her gut. Now, as she replayed Sonny's behavior and the mayor's rush to bury Walter, her instinct screamed that something was wrong. Downstairs, Sarah Bennett, her friend Walter's daughter-in-law, was cleaning up the remnants of the funeral reception. Sarah was an imposing presence in her quiet way, 5'8" angular, with strong cheekbones and eyes the color of steel. She had an efficient, almost brisk manner that came from years of nursing, but there was a warmth underneath, especially with children and the wounded. Life had forced Sarah into resilience. She'd lost her husband to a tragic accident a decade ago, and raised Ellie mostly alone, with Walter's steady hand for support. Grief had shaped her kindness into something both soft and immovable. Kayla joined Sarah in the kitchen. The woman stood at the sink sleeves, rolled scrubbing a casserole dish with more force than necessary. Her lips were pressed into a line. "How's Ellie?" Kayla asked. "Sleeping, I hope," Sarah said, without turning. It was a hard day. Her hands paused. "Ellie keeps asking if Grandpa is coming back. I told her he's watching over us, but I wish I believed it as much as she does." Kayla hesitated. "Sarah, can I ask you something strange?" She glanced toward the living room, where Sonny lay with his chin on his paws. "Did Walter ever talk about any enemies? Anyone who would want to hurt him?" Sarah's shoulders stiffened. She shook her head slowly. "Not that I know of. He was working more than usual these last few months, late-night secretive calls. I figured it was a case, but he didn't share details. You know how he was." Her voice dropped. "The mayor wants the burial tomorrow morning. No autopsy. He said it would be disrespectful." Kayla's jaw tightened. Disrespectful to who Walter was? Healthy. Last month he ran circles around half the department in that charity run. He never complained of chest pain or anything. Sarah dried her hands, then leaned against the counter, her eyes troubled. Don Reeves doesn't want questions. Maybe he just wants closure. But it feels too fast. Kayla finished? Exactly. They stood in silence, both struggling with the same unspoken fear. Eventually, Sarah gave Kayla a tired smile. "He trusted you more than anyone, Kayla. If something's off, you'll find it." Kayla nodded, then checked her watch. She would need to return to the station for paperwork, and more importantly, to check Walter's office. Before leaving, she knelt beside Sonny. "Wanna come, buddy?" The golden retriever immediately perked up, tail thumping. Together, they walked into the night rain, still whispering on the roof. At the police station, the late shift dispatcher Carl Jameson looked up from his crossword. Carl was a heavy-set man, with thinning blonde hair, a bushy mustache, and a perpetual smile that made him approachable to everyone, criminals and kids alike. He'd been with the department for over 20 years, a stabilizing force, and today wore a black armband for Walter. Detective Morgan Carl greeted quietly. "Long day." The longest, she replied. "I need to check Chief Bennett's office." Carl handed her a key. Reeves said to keep things locked until after the burial. "You need anything, just call me." Inside Walter's office, the air was thick with memories, shelves of battered police manuals, commendations, and a faded photograph of a much younger Bennett beside an older golden retriever, Sonny's predecessor perhaps. On the desk lay a file labeled simply Operation Sapphire. Kayla opened it, scanning the sparse notes, surveillance reports, unexplained withdrawals from the town budget, and a list of names she didn't recognize. She tucked the folder into her bag for review. As she locked up, Sonny stopped in the hallway, nose twitching. He trotted over to a bench beneath the stairwell, sniffed intently, and pawed at the floorboards. Kayla knelt, shining her phone's light into the crack. There, wedged beneath the boards, was a weathered key attached to a tag that read 4K. Kayla pocketed the key, feeling a chill at the deliberate message. Back outside, the rain had let up, leaving the world slick and reflective. Kayla and Sunny walked home beneath the flickering street lamps, their shadows trailing behind. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was Walter's death truly natural, or was it the final move in a larger game? Why had Sunny, usually so gentle, reacted with such terror at the funeral? And what secrets was the late chief trying to leave for her? As she reached her porch, her phone buzzed with a text from Mayor Reeves, reminder burial tomorrow at 8 a.m. No further delays. Kayla stared at the message, the urge to push back burning inside her. She looked down at Sunny, who met her gaze with quiet faith. That night, sleep did not come easy. The shadows in her room felt longer, the house more empty without Walter's gruff humor. But Kayla was her mentor's student. She would not ignore her instincts. Whatever secret Walter Bennett had died with, or perhaps not died with, she would bring it to light. And Sunny, faithful and ever watchful, would be by her side. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the streets of Redwood Falls shining like dark glass beneath the clouded sky. The sun, still hidden behind a blanket of overcast gray, offered little warmth. It was the kind of Oregon morning that made time feel slower, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Kayla Morgan arrived at the station early, her steps brisk despite the chill in the air. She had slept barely 2 hours, her mind turning over fragments of memory clues and what-ifs. The key Sunny had uncovered the night before burned in her jacket pocket like a silent challenge. She had yet to figure out what it opened, but a hunch told her it would be connected to the growing weight of secrets Bennett had left behind. In Walter Bennett's now vacant office, Kayla carefully opened a locked drawer in his desk, one she'd seen him reach into countless times but had never accessed herself. Inside were ordinary things: paper clips, outdated memos, a faded photograph of Walter in uniform, standing beside a young boy with a fishing rod. But taped beneath the drawer's false bottom was a small envelope labeled K, in case of silence. She opened it to find a folded sheet of paper with 4 simple words: "Find the wooden box." Kayla exhaled slowly. Her thoughts jumped immediately to Ellie. By the time she pulled up to the Bennett residence, it was just after 9 a.m. Sarah answered the door in jeans and a flannel shirt, her dark hair tied back face pale from a sleepless night. Her tall frame seemed thinner today, as though the weight of grief was slowly compressing her strength. "I didn't expect you this early," she said, stepping aside to let Kayla and Sunny in. "I need to talk to Ellie," Kayla said gently. Sarah tilted her head. "She's in the study. Drawing. She hasn't said much since the funeral." In the back room, Ellie sat cross-legged on the carpet, a set of colored pencils scattered around her. The sketch in front of her was startling: a dark casket-white flowers and a golden dog barking at the center. Sunny padded over and laid his head gently on her lap. "Hi, Detective Kayla," Ellie said quietly, not looking up. "Hi, Ellie," Kayla said, kneeling beside her. "Can I ask you something?" Ellie nodded. "Did your grandpa ever talk about a special box? Something he might have hidden under the stairs?" Ellie turned her head, thoughtful. "He told me once, when I had a nightmare and I asked if he ever got scared. He said he kept his scariest stuff in a wooden box under the stairs. But I thought he meant like old army medals or something. Do you think we can look for it together?" The girl stood, immediately brushing her skirt down. "Okay, I'll show you where I think he meant." They moved toward the old staircase that led to the basement. Beneath it was a low storage crawlspace packed with dusty boxes and folded tarps. Ellie pointed to a section near the back. He was kneeling here that night with a flashlight. Kayla crouched down and began moving crates aside until her fingers touched smooth wood, not a crate, but a slim locked chest the size of a shoebox, its brass hinges dulled by time. She inserted the key Sunny had found. The lock clicked open. Inside was a small flash drive, a leather-bound notebook, and an old mini recorder. Kayla held the items carefully like relics from another time. Ellie hovered beside her. "Do you know what it is?" she whispered. Kayla gave her a reassuring nod. "I think this might explain everything." Back at the station, Kayla plugged the flash drive into her laptop. Dozens of files appeared, most labeled Operation Dagger. The name meant nothing to her, but as she opened one document after another, the picture became clearer. Bennett had been working on something enormous, a corruption case implicating multiple town officials, including members of the police department. There were photos, ledger scans, and even transcripts of conversations recorded without the subject's knowledge. Most damning of all was a voice memo from Bennett himself. She clicked to play. If you're hearing this, Bennett's voice crackled, then I'm either dead or can't speak for myself. Operation Dagger is real. It started as a look into misused budgets, but it goes deeper. I've traced the flow of funds to shell companies connected to Mayor Reeves's inner circle. I was supposed to meet with an FBI contact next week. I may not get there. Trust Sonny. Trust your gut, Kayla. Kayla leaned back in her chair, stunned. The casual affability of Mayor Don Reeves had always rubbed her the wrong way, but this was treason against the very town he swore to protect. Later that afternoon, Kayla returned to the Bennett house this time, with a copy of Walter's notebook. She found Sarah in the backyard hanging laundry, despite the threat of more rain. Sarah's hands were red from the cold, but her face had regained some color. I found something, Kayla said quietly. Sarah looked up, and Kayla handed her the notebook. Sarah flipped through a few pages, and her breath caught. He was keeping this from everyone. Even you, Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. We stopped talking about work after my husband died. He thought I carried too much already. Kayla looked at her then, down at Sonny, who sat on the porch steps watching the horizon. I think it's time we make noise, Kayla said. The mayor's trying to bury this fast, but Walter didn't raise us to be quiet. Sarah's gaze hardened. Tell me what you need me to do. That evening, Kayla sent a secure message to the local FBI field office, including encrypted versions of the files and audio. She marked it urgent. As she stood at her front window, later sipping a lukewarm cup of tea, she caught Sonny staring again, his ears slightly raised, posture alert. Following his gaze, she noticed something strange, a black car idling 2 houses down, headlights off. She narrowed her eyes. The world outside may have stopped mourning Walter Bennett, but the battle he started had just begun. The night pressed heavily over Redwood Falls, wrapping the town in shadows, and a hush broken only by the wind shivering through the pine trees. The air had grown colder, the forecast hinting at an early frost. Under a sickle moon, St. Agnes Funeral Home sat at the edge of town, its stained glass windows now black and silent, the parking lot empty except for a single streetlight, pooling amber across the curb. Inside, Kayla Morgan sat on a wooden chair near the front viewing room, jacket zipped high, boots planted firm on the old tile. She had told Carl Jameson, the kindly night watchman and dispatcher, that she'd take the late shift watching over Chief Bennett's remains. Carl, a round balding man in his 60s, always cheerful, whose slow walk and careful diction calmed grieving families, had raised a skeptical brow, but handed over the keys without question. Don't let the place give you the creeps. He'd teased, his voice gruff with affection. Kayla hadn't told Sarah or Ellie about her decision to stay, not wanting to alarm them. She had sent them home with gentle reassurance, promising to call if there was news. Sarah, her face still drawn and pale, had hugged her tightly. The embrace more desperate than Kayla expected. Ellie, in pajamas and a too-big coat, had only knotted Sonny's leash tight in her hands. Now, Sonny lay stretched at Kayla's feet, golden fur glowing faintly in the lamplight. He was more restless than usual, ears swiveling, eyes fixed on the far wall where the casket rested behind a velvet rope. Occasionally, he would rise, sniff the air, and emit a low, uneasy growl. Kayla found herself comforted by his presence. She absently scratched behind his ears, heart pounding with the anticipation of something, she didn't know what, lurking just beyond the veil of night. It was close to midnight when the door rattled. Kayla straightened, hand hovering near her sidearm out of habit. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold wind, and a figure bundled in a dark wool coat, tall with squared shoulders and a brisk, confident step. He pulled off a battered fedora, revealing a head of silver hair and a strong jaw shadowed by 2 days' stubble. His eyes, dark and quick, flicked from Kayla to the casket and back. Detective Morgan. His voice was deep, rich, the kind that could fill a bar room or silence a crowd. Frank Holloway. I hope I'm not intruding. She took him in with a cop's instinct, late 50s fit for his age, hands large and calloused nose crooked from an old break. There was an air of military precision in the way he stood, and a certain practiced warmth that didn't quite reach his eyes. Frank Holloway introduced himself as an old friend of Walter Bennett. We served together years back. I heard about Walter, came as soon as I could. He handed Kayla a faded business card with a Portland address, Holloway Security Consulting, embossed in gold. Kayla kept her posture relaxed, but watched him closely. We weren't expecting visitors this late. He offered a rueful smile. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd pay my respects. Walter and I lost touch, but old debts, you know. Sonny's response was immediate and unmistakable. The small golden retriever planted himself between Kayla's and Frank Hackle's, raised barking sharply a high warning sound. Kayla placed a calming hand on Sonny's collar, but the dog refused to retreat, muscles tensed as if ready to lunge. Frank stepped back, holding up his hands. I see I'm not popular here. He yours? Walter's mostly, Kayla said, voice even. And lately, my best backup. Frank's gaze flickered lips, pressing together for a split second. Walter always liked his animals. Smart dog. They spoke for a few minutes, Frank recalling old war stories, Kayla listening with a detective's patience. But his details were vague. Back in '98 down by the river, no specifics. His questions about the investigation were too carefully casual, and Kayla's suspicion only deepened. She decided to keep her cards close. Was there anything you wanted to leave for the family? Kayla asked, rising to gently steer the conversation and Frank toward the exit. Frank shook his head, regret shadowing his face. Just needed to see him one last time. He offered his hand. It was warm and strong, but Kayla caught a whiff of aftershave that was almost aggressively masculine, mixed with something faintly metallic, gun oil perhaps. She nodded as he left, and watched from the window as his black sedan merged with the darkness taillights blinking twice before vanishing. The room felt colder after he was gone. Kayla let out a slow breath, then returned to her vigil. The hours crept by, shadows lengthening and curling along the walls. Kayla fought the urge to nod off, staring instead at the lines of light cast by the street lamp. Sonny refused to settle his body, coiled every sense alert. Around 2 a.m., he rose and padded to the casket, sitting so close his nose almost touched the wood. His eyes fixed on a single point, one of the brass handles slightly tarnished. Then he began to bark, not an alarm, but with a rhythmic insistence, one bark, pause, another bark. Kayla watched unease pooling in her gut. Sonny glanced back at her, as if begging her to understand. She crossed the room and knelt beside him. What is it, boy? Sonny pressed a paw against the bottom edge of the casket, whining, then barked again. Kayla examined the handle. Nothing seemed amiss, but when she tapped the wood, she heard a faint hollow echo. She frowned. Had the casket always sounded that way? She was tempted to open the lid, but the rules were clear. Only the funeral director and family could approve that. Still, her mentor's voice echoed in her mind. When something feels wrong, trust it. Instead, she set her phone to record and quietly documented the dog's behavior and her observations. Then texted Sarah, who replied almost immediately, "Can't sleep. Do what you think is right." Kayla hesitated, torn between duty and intuition. She decided to stay the rest of the night at the funeral home, stretching out on the office couch, Sonny at her feet. But she never truly slept. Every creak of the building, every soft whimper from Sonny kept her alert. At dawn, as sunlight filtered through the stained glass, Kayla rose, her resolve stronger than ever. She left the funeral home, locking up and tucking the memory of Frank Holloway's visit deep in her mind. She would find out more about him. For now, her faith was in Sonny. His warning was too clear, too urgent to ignore. Kayla resolved to follow every thread, no matter where it led, even if it meant defying the town's mayor, breaking the rules, and risking her reputation. Sonny, sensing her determination, wagged his tail and walked at her side, his loyalty and courage an anchor in the gathering storm. By the time the clock struck midnight for the second night in a row, Kayla Morgan had begun to question whether the silence in the funeral home was natural or manufactured. The whole building seemed to be holding its breath, as if even the walls knew something wasn't right. The soft humming of the antique heating system was the only sound, punctuated now and then by Sonny's low growl or the scratch of his paws against the polished tile floor. Sonny hadn't left his post beside Walter Bennett's casket since sundown. The golden retriever's usually playful demeanor had been replaced with a kind of grim intensity. His small, sturdy frame was locked in a guarding stance, and his dark eyes never strayed from the center of the room. Kayla, seated in a stiff-backed chair near the back of the parlor, was reading through Walter's leather notebook for the third time. Its pages were a goldmine of observations, dates, names, coded references to money trails, and questionable land deals that connected city officials to shell companies. She had sent a second copy of the files to a secure cloud folder earlier that day just in case. Then it happened. A soft sound so faint it could have been the groan of old wood pulled Kayla's eyes from the notebook. Sonny, already alert, stood up sharply, ears pricked and tail stiff. The sound came again, a shuffle, a shifting of weight from inside the closed casket. Kayla dropped the notebook. Sonny let out a sudden violent bark, claws scraping the floor, as he leapt toward the casket, his whole body trembling. He barked again, louder this time, then scratched at the edge of the wooden lid, frantic as if trying to dig through it. Kayla bolted upright, her heart hammering. "No," she breathed, "no way." She crossed the room in 3 long strides and placed her ear to the side of the casket. For a moment she heard only the hammering of her own pulse, then a muffled thud like the weak tap of knuckles from the inside. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. Grabbing her phone, she dialed 911 with one hand, while the other fumbled to unlock the ornate latch of the casket. Her voice was sharp and focused when the dispatcher answered. "This is Detective Kayla Morgan. Immediate medical emergency at St. Agnes Funeral Home. The deceased Chief Walter Bennett is alive. I repeat, alive." The dispatcher stuttered, but Kayla was already setting the phone down, both hands now on the lid. She pushed it open. The heavy wooden top creaked on its hinges. Inside, Walter Bennett lay in his formal dress, blue's face pale and still, but unmistakably alive. His chest moved shallowly, but undeniably. His eyelids fluttered. A faint groan escaped his lips, barely audible. The man who had been pronounced dead 2 days earlier had just moved. Kayla staggered back, clutching the edge of the casket for balance. Sonny barked once, then stopped, as if sensing that he had done enough. She placed 2 fingers on Bennett's neck, a weak but steady pulse. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights filled the stained glass windows. EMTs arrived, 3 of them, led by a woman in her mid-30s with a dark ponytail and a no-nonsense tone. Her name tag read S. Lang. She was tall, wiry, and moved with the practiced grace of someone used to working under pressure. Her eyes barely widened as Kayla explained the situation. Lang and her team immediately set to work, checking Bennett's vitals and starting an IV. "We've got shallow respiration, severe dehydration, pulse weak but stable. Pupils responsive," she said. "Let's get him to County General now." Kayla followed as they wheeled the stretcher out into the night, but she paused at the door when she noticed something. A small puncture mark on Walter's neck just beneath the collar of his uniform. She leaned in and found another on his arm. Lang raised an eyebrow as Kayla pointed them out. "Drug-induced coma?" Kayla asked. Lang gave a slow nod. "Could be. We'll know more once we run tox. He's lucky. A few more hours and we wouldn't be having this conversation." As the ambulance pulled away, Kayla turned to find the funeral director, Mr. Jerome Tiller, standing by the chapel doors. Tiller was a man of refined appearance and uncomfortable energy. Short and stocky, with thinning blonde hair slicked back, and a pencil mustache, he wrung his hands as he approached. "This is unprecedented," he said. "Detective, please understand. I received the body, with full certification of death, from Dr. Levin. Cardiac arrest." I'm not blaming you," Mr. Tiller, Kayla said. "But from this point forward, this entire building is a crime scene. I need access to everything, the prep room, the logs, surveillance if you have it." Tiller's eyes widened. "Crime scene. Yes, someone tried to bury the chief alive." Back at the station, the fallout began immediately. Sarah arrived with Ellie an hour later, both shaken but alive with relief. Sarah's expression when she saw Walter being wheeled into County General's ER collapsed from tightly held composure into sobs. She clutched his hand as the doctors moved around them. Kayla stood nearby, her hands in her coat pockets, watching the scene with both awe and fury. Walter Bennett had been buried alive, drugged into a state so near death that even trained medical personnel hadn't noticed the truth. And someone, likely someone in power, had wanted him to stay that way. Frank Holloway came back into her mind, too smooth, too coincidental. She left the hospital only to return home for a shower and change. When she reached her apartment, the front door was unlocked. She drew her gun instantly, pushing the door open with her shoulder. Inside, nothing looked disturbed, but she could tell someone had been there. The slight scuff on the hardwood, the faint smell of aftershave, not her own. No note, no damage. Just presence. Kayla checked her secure drive. The cloud copy was untouched, but someone had known to look. She was being watched. Sonny, now curled by her feet, lifted his head and gave a low whimper, his body tense again. Kayla closed the laptop, heart heavy. Her mentor was alive, but barely. The people behind this had nearly succeeded, and they were still out there. But now they were on notice. The cold edge of October sharpened overnight, coating the streets of Redwood Falls with a brittle frost by morning. Outside County General Hospital, the sky was a washed-out silver, and the air carried a silence that felt heavier than usual, like the town itself was waiting for something to crack. Inside the intensive care unit, Walter Bennett lay still pale against white sheets, wires looping from his chest and arms like tangled lifelines. The machines beside him beeped steadily, a rhythm Kayla Morgan had memorized since the moment they had wheeled him in. He hadn't woken yet, but the doctors assured her there was hope. There was always hope, they said. Kayla stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded tightly across her chest, jaw clenched. She hadn't slept since the night the coffin had opened. Her mind was a rolling storm of images. Sonny barking Frank Holloway's smile, the puncture wound on Walter's neck, and her front door cracked open like an invitation. Still no change. Sarah's voice came from the doorway. She looked more composed this morning, though her eyes remained shadowed. She wore a long gray cardigan over her nurse scrubs, and a thin scarf wound neatly at her neck. She had always had that quiet strength grace under pressure, but this week had tested the edges of it. Her tall frame seemed a little more brittle, her movements more precise, like someone trying hard not to shatter. Kayla shook her head, stable but unconscious. Neurologist says it could be hours or days. Sarah walked over and rested her hand on Walter's arm. I always said he was too stubborn to go quietly. Her voice wavered, but she forced a small smile. Kayla let out a breath. I need to talk to Ellie. Sarah nodded, instantly guarded. She's still at home. She hasn't wanted to come back here since she saw the ambulance. She's been quieter than usual. Has she said anything about the night of the funeral? Or anything Walter said before he went missing? She mentioned he'd been hiding things in old notebooks, and she's been reading through them like they're treasure maps. Sarah paused. She says something's coming. Says she can feel it. Later that afternoon, Kayla drove to the Bennett house. It sat on a small hill just beyond town, its white siding dulled by weather, and its shutters slightly askew from years of neglect. Inside the living room was scattered with books and crumpled drawings Ellie's work. Sarah had gone back to the hospital, leaving Kayla alone with Ellie and Sonny, who followed her like a golden shadow. Ellie sat cross-legged on the floor, her nose buried in one of Walter's old journals. When she looked up, her blue eyes were wide behind thick glasses, and her expression was dead serious. I found something, she said. Kayla crouched beside her. What is it? Ellie flipped open the notebook to a page filled with Walter's neat, deliberate script. A string of names, some crossed out, others circled, ran down the center. A symbol had been drawn in the corner, a triangle inside a circle. He said this was the inner circle, Ellie explained, the ones that couldn't be trusted. Kayla scanned the page. One name leapt out, Frank Holloway. Next to it in red ink, operates under Reeves. Private work, dangerous. Avoid confrontation unless necessary. So, Walter knew, Kayla murmured. He knew Frank was working with the mayor. Ellie nodded, then hesitated. I saw Frank outside our house last night. Kayla blinked. You're sure I was at the window? He got out of a black car and stood near the porch. He looked at our door. Then someone else came out and talked to him. I couldn't see who. But they gave him something, a bag. Kayla's stomach turned cold. Why didn't you tell Sarah? She wouldn't believe me. I don't think she wants to know. Kayla rubbed her temples. A child had witnessed a possible criminal meeting outside her house, and her mother, grieving overwhelmed, had likely dismissed it as imagination. You did the right thing, Kayla said gently. That night, Kayla returned to the station and began digging into Frank Holloway's records. His military file was vague, too vague. He'd been discharged under confidential conditions, then opened his own consulting firm, specializing in surveillance security and corporate risk solutions. Most of his contracts were redacted. One, however, linked him to Mayor Reeves's 2019 re-election campaign as a private advisor. It was confirmation. Frank wasn't just a coincidence, he was Reeves's fixer. And he had access experience, and now a motive. Kayla sent the file to Agent Dahlia Ung, the FBI contact, who had finally responded to her encrypted email. Ung was based in Eugene and described over the phone as a field agent with teeth meticulous, blunt, and uninterested in local politics. She doesn't play nice, Carl had said with admiration. My kind of woman. Back at home, Kayla double-checked her locks, rearmed her alarm system, and placed a chair beneath the door handle. Sonny curled at her feet again, but tonight his sleep was restless. Around 2 a.m., he sat up sharply, ears forward, and growled low. Kayla snapped awake, hand on the gun beneath her pillow. There was a creak outside. She slid out of bed, bare feet silent against the floorboards, and crossed to the window. A car sat parked a few houses down. Not the same black sedan. This one was gray, unmarked, but its engine was running. The driver's silhouette was visible but unreadable. Kayla lifted her phone and took a photo. As she zoomed in, the car pulled away. She didn't sleep again. The next day, Sarah called. The doctors say Walter's vitals are improving. Kayla felt the weight lift slightly. That's good. That's something. But they found traces of a paralytic compound in his system. Very advanced. Nothing over the counter. The hospital says it had to be administered by someone with medical access. Kayla's thoughts froze. You're saying someone at the hospital might be involved? Sarah hesitated. I don't know. But the nurse who signed off on Walter's initial pronouncement, Dr. Levin, hasn't shown up since yesterday morning. Kayla's mind raced. A doctor, a fixer, a mayor, and all connected by one man's survival. That night, Ellie left another drawing by Kayla's car windshield. It showed a man in a suit shaking hands with a figure in shadows. Above them loomed the triangle and circle symbol, drawn in red. Grandpa said symbols always tell the truth, Ellie had written. Kayla stared at the image for a long time, then folded it gently and placed it in her coat. Rain pelted the windows of Redwood Falls County Hospital as dusk fell like a curtain of steel gray over the town. Inside the administrative wing, an air of tense anticipation filled the small conference room. Kayla sat at the head of the table, a recorder in her pocket, a mug of black coffee growing cold beside her, and her golden retriever. Sonny lying dutifully at her feet, tail occasionally thumping against the floor. His ears were twitching alert. Across from her stood Agent Dahlia Ng, now fully integrated into the case. Dahlia was in her early 40s with short jet-black hair cropped close to her head and a face carved with sharp angles that rarely betrayed emotion. Her voice was low and clinical, her navy blue blazer tailored to military precision. She was not one for small talk, but she'd gained Kayla's respect quickly with her integrity and, more importantly, her clarity in a situation full of fog. We have Reeves's call log triangulated, Dahlia said, tapping the screen of her tablet. Our bait worked. When you leaked the information that Walter died from poison and that the autopsy revealed foul play, he called someone. That line was tapped. We've got him. Kayla nodded, her expression hard. Did he say anything useful? He confessed to authorizing a containment strategy regarding Bennett. We're still decoding euphemisms, but he said, and I quote, "We wouldn't be in this mess if Holloway had just stuck to the dosage." He thinks Bennett's dead. Sonny let out a low growl, sensing the tension. Is it enough to arrest him? Kayla asked. We need one more thing, Dahlia replied. Action. Words are slippery. But if he sends someone again, and we're waiting, we've got him nailed. The plan was simple, dangerous but effective. They would release a hospital report carefully doctored that Sonny had accidentally ingested a sedative meant for Walter. The report would suggest that the dog had been brought back to the hospital for overnight monitoring. In truth, Sonny was fine. He'd be hidden in a nearby supply closet next to the pharmaceutical storage with Kayla and a small team nearby. Dahlia's team took over setting up hidden cameras and motion sensors. One of the agents, a lean, sandy-haired man named Harris, introduced himself briefly. He had calm blue eyes and a steady demeanor, an Army vet turned cyber specialist who now monitored audio channels like a hawk watching a field mouse. Kayla stayed behind with Sonny, who sat obediently on the gurney tail, curled around his paws, head resting on Kayla's thigh. She stroked him gently. You ready for one last job, buddy? She whispered. Sonny licked her hand, his amber eyes steady. Later that night, around 2 a.m., the trap was set. The lights in the hallway were dimmed for energy-saving mode, and only Dahlia, Kayla Harris, and Nurse Lydia remained on the night shift. Lydia was in her 50s, round-faced with warm brown eyes and a slow southern drawl. She had worked at the hospital for 23 years and had earned the trust of everyone. Her presence added credibility to the deception. She sat at the main desk with a crossword puzzle, occasionally glancing toward Kayla's corridor with a conspiratorial smile. At 2:37 a.m., the hallway motion sensor blinked red. He's here, Harris said into the comms. Kayla crouched behind a cabinet, heartbeat steady. She could hear footsteps measured slow, not the stride of someone lost, but someone looking for something. Or someone. Then the door to the pharmaceutical storage creaked open. Through the gap in the cabinet door, Kayla saw a figure in scrubs, face hidden beneath a surgical mask, moving quietly. The man paused, scanned the room, then turned to the cabinet marked sedatives. Just as he reached into his coat for something, a syringe no doubt Sonny leapt. With a snarl that echoed like a lion's roar through the quiet corridors, Sonny lunged from his hiding spot. The man staggered, dropping the syringe, and raised a taser too late. Sonny's teeth sank into his forearm, dragging him down with the full force of trained precision. Before the man could react further, Kayla was on him, gun trained to his head. "Move, and I swear I'll end it," she snapped. The lights flashed on. Dahlia and Harris stormed in, pinning the attacker to the floor. When they ripped the mask off, Kayla felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't Frank Holloway. It was Dr. Alan Levin, the same doctor who had pronounced Bennett dead. He was tall, in his mid-50s, with streaks of gray at his temples and a gaunt, almost haunted face. His hospital credentials had given him all the access he needed. "He told me it had to be done," Levin muttered as they cuffed him. Said if Bennett woke up, all of us were finished. "Who's he?" Dahlia asked. Levin glanced at Kayla, lips trembling. "Reeves." He said, "I owed him after what happened in Portland. You don't understand. They never forget." The confession was caught on audio and video. The next morning, Dahlia prepared the official arrest warrant for Mayor Reeves. The morning broke soft and golden over Redwood Falls, the first clear sky after nearly a week of rain. Sunlight streamed through the east-facing windows of St. Eliza Memorial Hospital, warming the corner room where Walter Bennett lay, propped up by crisp white pillows. His skin was pale but no longer ghostly. His eyes sharper now, and the bruises on his arms from IVs faded like old memories. The monitor beeped softly, a rhythm of life slowly reasserting itself. Kayla stood at the foot of his bed, dressed in her formal police blues. The badge freshly polished her posture, both proud and guarded. Sonny sat loyally beside her, his golden fur glowing in the sun, his tail gently swishing with anticipation. Walter smiled, a slow, almost boyish curl of the lips. "You've done well, Morgan," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "Better than I ever hoped." "You told me to trust my gut," Kayla replied. Turns out Sonny's gut was louder than mine. They both looked down at the retriever, who tilted his head as if accepting the compliment. Bennett reached out a trembling hand, and Sonny leaned forward, placing his snout gently in the old man's palm. It was a gesture that said everything: recognition, gratitude, and a long overdue reunion. Later that day, the town's silence was broken by news vans, local reporters, and FBI personnel walking in and out of City Hall. Mayor Don Reeves had been arrested at dawn. The charges were sweeping conspiracy, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and a dozen others tied to Operation Dagger, a scheme involving embezzled public funds, illegal surveillance, and a silent network of intimidation that had gripped Redwood Falls for years. Among those arrested was Police Captain Norris Gale, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with a once imposing demeanor and an arrogance that had made him both feared and disliked. His refusal to believe Sonny's initial behavior now stood as a painful reminder of how corruption blinds even those meant to protect. Kayla watched him being led away in cuffs. His once starched uniform wrinkled his gaze hollow. With the command structure in shambles, the county sheriff's office temporarily appointed Kayla as acting chief of police. It was a move that surprised no one, but moved many. She was young, yes, but she had proven herself not just in resilience, but in principle. She declined a public ceremony. Instead, she held a quiet staff meeting in the precinct's garage where she spoke plainly: "We rebuild, from honesty, from truth, and with every doggone instinct Sonny has." That earned her a chorus of laughter and renewed respect. Back at her small cottage on the northern edge of town, life slowly began to breathe again. Ellie had moved in just days after the arrests, her legal guardian papers signed by Bennett before his condition worsened. She was now 10 years old and a bit taller than before, her curly auburn hair always a little wild, her freckles dancing when she smiled. Despite the trauma, her spirit had hardened into something remarkable, resilient, yet tender. Kayla had cleared the spare bedroom and painted it lilac, Ellie's favorite color. The girl hung Bennett's old police badge on her nightstand, beside a drawing she made of Sonny, with the caption, "My hero, fluffy and brave." One afternoon, a letter arrived handwritten in slightly shaky but unmistakable script. It was from Walter Bennett, now recovering in a quiet rehab facility upstate. "Kayla, you and that golden ball of sunshine saved more than just me. You saved this town, and you saved the girl I love like my own. Don't forget, rebuilding is harder than uncovering. But with you at the helm and Sonny keeping watch, I sleep easy. Proud of you. Always." Kayla read it aloud to Ellie and Sonny on the front porch. Ellie clapped, Sonny barked once, and together they decided it was time for something the town had forgotten how to do: celebrate. That weekend, the trio took to the Redwood Hills for a simple picnic. The clouds were gone, and the trees still glistened from the past week's rain. Ellie wore overalls and a sun hat too big for her head. Kayla carried a canvas bag filled with peanut butter sandwiches, apples, and a surprise dog treat for Sonny. The meadow stretched wide dandelions swaying gently in the breeze, and in the center they laid a checkered blanket. Kayla poured lemonade into paper cups. Ellie sprawled on her belly reading a mystery book. Sonny, content and warm, curled into her side head, resting on her stomach. His tail flicked lazily whenever she giggled. There were no speeches, no medals, no newspapers. Just sunlight, grass, and the soft whisper of a town healing. Kayla leaned back, watching the two most important souls in her life, one small and fierce, the other golden and loyal. "This," she whispered, "is the family I never expected, but the only one I ever needed." And as the sun dipped low behind the pines, casting long golden rays across the hills, Sonny's eyes remained bright, ever watchful, ever faithful. The storm had passed. What remained was peace. A beginning, not an end. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the biggest truth. In this story, it was a golden retriever who refused to stay silent and ended up saving not just a man, but a whole town. In real life, loyalty and instinct are often overlooked, but they can be the difference between silence and justice. So ask yourself, who or what in your life has tried to tell you something you were too busy to hear? Let us know in the comments below, and if this story moved, you share it with someone who believes in second chances. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories where love, loyalty, and courage change everything.